we are calling it tentatively You, Me, and Loki. It is our Loki, not necessarily analysis, but more of a discussion video series that we plan on doing on every episode of Loki. Now, we missed the bus on the first one, but we just had this idea this week. So we're going to do episodes 1 and 2 today in this episode. And then moving forward, we'll do one episode at a time. So next week will be episode 3, and then 4, and so on and so forth.
I guess the proper way for us to continue about this, much to what Alex said, yes, this is not going to be a deep analysis, Easter egg hunts and stuff. It's just going to be Alex and I's just first reactions, having just watched episode 2 that came out today, and then also reflecting on episode 1. And going forward, it'll just be our basically review. I think would be the best way to talk about this.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of divvy off into different discussions based on the things that we decide to talk about. But I think that where we should start, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, is our initial thoughts of the show as a whole, because we are kind of clumping both episode 1 and episode 2 together. Both of us have not seen episode 1 since presumably last week when it premiered, and episode 2 is fresh on our minds. After this particular episode 2, The Variant, ended, it almost felt like, and for critics, they were screened both episodes in one go. So critics
so we are kind of doing this right.
Yeah, and more or less, but they obviously had embargoes and they only wanted to talk about so much. Because there was a lot of us that still hadn't even seen the premiere episode, so they didn't want to go off into what happens in episode 2. But seeing as they coupled both these episodes for critics and media pundits for initial reviews before the premiere, and after watching it, it feels like both of these episodes kind of work as one.
Before we go any further, let's just lay out the statement. Like, this is going to have spoilers in it. I'm sure that the thumbnail says that there are spoilers, so you should be aware clicking on this video. It's going to have spoilers on it. We're not going to avoid spoilers at all. So if you haven't seen episode 1 and 2, you want to go in it blind, go watch them, then come back here, because we're going to spoil some stuff. I think we should go ahead and start with how we feel about episode 1, or at least give a brief summary of episode 1 and then our thoughts. As much as we can. And then we'll jump into episode 2 after that. Let's start with episode 1, so let's off the gate. So we kind of knew where this series was going to start when we saw Endgame. As soon as they announced the series, everyone was like, duh, this is, of course, what direction they're going in. So we kind of knew watching Endgame, yeah, this is where the series is going to start. And just as we had assumed, it is, in fact, exactly where we start. Actually, the very first shot of the series is that shot of New York from, I think it was the first Avengers movie, but later the time heist in Endgame, where it kind of goes into the tower and they have Loki being held up, and you see the entire scene from Endgame play out where the Tesseract gets kicked and Loki takes it and disappears. That's like the first scene in this TV show to just be like, hey, here's where we are. And the next thing that we see is Loki kind of waking up, quote unquote, in the same fashion that we saw Tony Stark kind of digging himself out of the sand in Iron Man 1. And I think that itself is a really great comparison, because that was a story about this asshole becoming a good guy, and this is kind of that same story. And it's like they both started the same way, buried neck deep in sand, and that comparison is just chef's kiss.
Absolutely intentional, because even the way that it is kind of staged, like the shot, the way it's positioned and everything, and the way that Tom Hiddleston as Loki is in the sand, it's 100% like meant to be mirrored from that scene from the first Iron Man. So Loki, he finds himself in the Gobi Desert. He is taken by the Timekeepers back to the TVA. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in this, but I believe that there's a lot of key things, at least specifically in episode 1, that we should definitely discuss. But to catch us all the way up, he's being held on trial for deviating from the sacred timeline by stealing the Tesseract, and now he's being held on trial. There's bevy of new characters that we're introduced to. Hunter B-15, Ravonna Renslayer, who is, basically the respected judge of the TVA that basically is like, hey, plead your case and we'll decide what happens to you according to the TVA and the Timekeepers, right? In comes Mobius M. Mobius. You have Owen Wilson, and he's basically like, hey, man, I need this guy because we're going to go do something. Wow, look at it. It's Loki. Wow, I've been studying Loki.
No.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone was waiting. When are they going to do it? When is the impression going to come? Because we're talking about Owen Wilson. He is the impression. So he basically pulls Loki aside and he's like, hey, man, we need your help. I could probably work with you, but we have a guy who is time hopping. There is a variant loose that is deviating from the sacred timeline. And when you deviate from the sacred timeline, you create a nexus event. And so it splits off. And if it gets to a certain point, this red line, then everything gets thrown into chaos. Yeah. So they are trying to find this person that is eluding them and killing their timekeepers. So that's how Owen Wilson as Mobius recruits Loki. But before we get to his, official formal recruiting, there's that brilliant scene, and I want to talk to you about it, Alex. The scene when they're basically reviewing Loki's life.
Yes. I'm excited to talk about this.
This is a pivotal scene.
Yeah, for sure. I think that something that a lot of people were concerned about was a lot of people love the journey that Loki has gone on throughout these past couple actual films in the MCU canon, where he's made up with his brother and learned how much he was loved by Odin and has really become a hero in his own, an anti-hero at best, but a hero nonetheless. And I think that a lot of people were worried because this Loki that we're watching isn't that Loki, that now we're going to see a Loki who is more dangerous, more evil, more set in his ways. The episode title for episode 1 is Glorious Purpose, and that's because that's what Loki, throughout this entire episode, is claiming that he has. He's supposed to rule the universe. He's supposed to have this glorious purpose, and that's the kind of mindset that Loki had that led him to work for Thanos and led him to try to collect the Infinity Stones and put him on this kind of dark path of destruction and evil. And this first episode almost, and this scene that you're bringing up, it kind of takes that journey that happened over all of those films, and it force feeds it to this Loki, and is you're gonna take it, and you're gonna figure out who you are and what you're supposed to be, because I'm gonna show you what's gonna happen to you. And that's this episode does a really good job of getting this Loki to where the last Loki was in a expedient amount of time. Yeah, and it's also not something that he gets to experience over time and through life experience. It's all shown in flashes and stuff. And there's also this notion, and they talk about it a lot in the second episode too, which is kind of speaking to a broader issue, not issue in the sense of a bad thing, but an issue that the show is dealing with and the characters are dealing with, which is this notion of a sacred timeline and the timekeepers who have this perfect order to things, this almost alpha and omega. They can see the past, present, future, and as soon as you as an individual deviate from that, that's a no-no. That's a nexus event. That cannot happen. And the TVA is created to set that back into order, which calls into question things like free will and who are you really and stuff like that. We'll get into that with more of the episode 2 talk, but for sure that is a huge theme here.
Definitely. And he's having to wrestle with all this stuff really, really quickly, and Mobius is really grilling him, being like, no, why do you do what you do? No, tell me, why do you think killing's great? Do you think it's good? You
like hurting people, don't you? That's your thing. Yeah. You like to hurt people. Why do you do it? It's because you're a scared little boy. That's the shit that he's grilling him with.
Yeah, and he's making him question his identity and his purpose. And it isn't it's not until he's really confronted with his mother's death that he had no real idea that he inadvertently caused that, because that's a future event.
I don't think that future Loki even knew to what extent he had caused that.
Yes, to what extent he knew she died, but he didn't know that
it was his choice
indirectly
that caused it.
Yes. But regardless of that, this is a Loki that did not live that. So he's seen like, oh shit, on the path that I'm going down, this happens, right?
Yeah.
Which it kind of really wakes him up. I think he has a really beautiful moment there when he's seeing that scene, and he even sees his own death, which is super profound as well. I mean, I think I would be disturbed and moved if I saw that, especially knowing that this is the Loki that was working for Thanos.
Yeah.
So to see then at the end of this road that you're killed by Thanos is like, oh shit.
Even more importantly, they made it really clear that Loki's death in that moment, he did that to sacrifice himself to save Thor. So take into consideration, like, imagine your worst enemy and then realizing suddenly through some magic means that in the future he's your like best friend and you actually die for him. Like, that's a huge wake-up call. Like, what did I miss that I didn't see this coming?
Definitely. That's it. That whole sequence is super great, and we sit in that scene for a long time. I will say that I'm really digging, more so than the other two Marvel shows, which I've enjoyed to varying degrees. Overwhelmingly, I think that these are all very, very good.
Yeah, just to wrap up in episode 1 and so that we can move forward to episode 2, one of the more important things that we see Loki going through, as well as this self-realization, is he's a trickster god. He understands, like, everybody's out to get everyone, and the con is always on for Loki. So he doesn't necessarily believe the TVA when they say, like, hey, we're the ultimate power in the universe. Like, it is what it is. You can believe what you want, but we are as good as it gets. He's like, no, you're not. He's like, I don't know where we are. I don't know who you are, but you're not the ultimate power. And he holds on to that until he almost makes his escape about halfway through the episode.
Yes.
And he finds the clerk who they gave the Tesseract to when he was first arrested. And he asks for the Tesseract back and realizes that it now holds no magic in this place because there is no magic in the TVA. Not only that, but when looking through the cart of items that have been taken by people who were arrested by the TVA, he sees a stack of Infinity Stones. And they're like, oh yeah, people use those as paperweights here.
We're clearly, even with WandaVision, I guess slightly with Falcon and Winter Soldier, but definitely WandaVision and now this show and what we know coming up with Doctor Strange next year and Spider-Man this year. Marvel is priming the gears, significantly more so now with this show.
Yeah.
The multiverse.
Oh yeah.
And it's I think on the terms of talking about the multiverse and how this is going to affect the MCU going forward and what we're about to see in this upcoming slate of shows and movies, the Infinity Stones being in that desk drawer has profound repercussions. I think in a really, really exciting way that I don't quite have all the answers to right now, thinking off the top of my head. But I think that one thing that I can speak to about this moment is that I think that this is just another character moment for Loki where it really kind of sets things into perspective of like, this was like a thing that he was like chasing after and like a way to wield power and to subjugate people and to be a ruler. Even with Thanos, like working alongside Thanos, and to see it diminished to such a degree where it's like nothing, basically, probably really rattled him a lot. And because then literally from that sequence, he walks over and he's looking at the monitor that has the sacred timeline, and he's like, so this is what like ultimate power is, basically, or whatever. He said something to that effect of like, this is what it is then, right here, right now, which I think goes to what we start to see in episode 2, and maybe you saw a little bit of it in episode 1, this conversation of ultimate power and what that means for Loki now that he sees this, because this is, again, still Loki from Avengers timeline, the 2012 movie, when he takes the Tesseract. So he's still that trickster. He doesn't have the life experience of Thor the Dark World and Ragnarok and all those other things. I feel personally he's still kind of back and forth on like, I'll work with you guys, like I'm warming up to you guys, like I'm changing who I am behavior wise and ambition wise, but then there's still the part of him that we still see in episode 2 that is trickster and mischievous and he wants an audience with the Timekeepers. And what
Yeah,
does
for
he
a reason that
want
we're not really
with the
sure of,
Timekeepers?
right?
Well, he alludes
Yeah.
to it vaguely, I think, or more directly. I think he tries to recruit the variant to be like, let's overthrow the Timekeepers, basically,
Yeah.
and let's rule, basically.
So, going back to the beginning of the episode, one of the first things that we see is Loki out of his prisoner jumper and now in this, like, really strange costume for Loki to wear. Because we're used to Loki wearing the, like, extravagant Asgardian, like, garb, which is, like, super Marvel, super, like, evil, like, big horns, lots of leather. And then even when he's, like, put into the jumpsuit, you're like, okay, but it's still Loki. He's just, like, arrested now. We've seen him like this before when he was being held on Asgard.
Right.
But when you see him in, like, the, like, windbreaker and the necktie that's, like, cut square at the bottom and, like, the pants with the belt buckle that has the logo on it, that's a strange look for Loki. Like, seeing him like that was weird.
He's wanting to work with the TVA. He is kind of turning over a new leaf. He's had a lot of profound introspection hit him.
Right.
And then there's still the part of him that is a trickster and mischievous and wants power, which is where we're seeing a lot of that interest in the TVA, like ruling the TVA, meeting the Timekeepers and all that jazz. And whether or not these Timekeepers are even real, that's a whole discussion as well, because we have that brilliant scene between him and Mobius where they're basically talking of, it's almost like a religious talk in a way, where Mobius lays out like, yeah, the Timekeepers, you know, kind of, they created us, they set things into order, because at the beginning of time there was a bunch of different branching timelines and stuff, but it like created war and stuff, and everything was going crazy. So the Timekeepers created the sacred timeline in order to prevent basically time collapsing and things folding in on itself and going crazy, as alluded to in Doctor Strange when who's the character, Mordo or something like that, he talks to Doctor Strange about being careful about messing with and manipulating time in that manner, which again is something that we're probably going to see in Multiverse of Madness. So they created the sacred timeline to prevent that. So Mobius is talking about that and talking about his purpose, and he's like, I'll never get to ride this jet ski because it's not, you know, part of the sacred timeline. And
but what an awesome, like, that entire scene was so well written. He's like, you're this great powerful being, like, why don't you, like, just, like, what's up with you and jet skis? He's like, have you ever seen a more beautifully designed thing? He said, in a world of chaos where nothing is ever right nor wrong, nor good nor evil, for one moment in 1990 we had something that the world all agreed on, and that is that jet skis are awesome. And I was just sitting here like, man, the writing is just
cool.
They are cool, right? Yeah, I thought about jet skis a lot today.
I'm sure a lot of people started to think about jet skis a lot more after this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
so
they have a really dense sort of like theological talk, like I was saying, Mobius telling Loki about why he does what he does and why he believes in what he believes. And Loki scoffs at it and says that that's poppycock, basically, like that's stupid or whatever. And he's like, so tell me what you are. What, you're the son of like a frost giant. Your dad is like a god. You live on Asgard with all this other like.
Yeah, he's like, this is what you're saying's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You're the right. He's like, it doesn't make sense where any of us come from, and that's just you just have to live with it and keep going. That's like the lesson that he wants him to take away is like, don't worry about where you come from or where you're going. Worry about right now. It's nice. It's a nice moment.
It's like everything is chaos, but we are just trying to make sense of the chaos in a lot of ways.
Weirdly enough, I'd say that this is my favorite role that I've seen Owen Wilson in, because it's not completely outrageous, but it's also not like super like he's trying too hard to not be outrageous, like say in a like a Marley and Me type role where it's like, oh, he's gonna break my heart. That's great, way to go, Owen Wilson. This is like a role where he just gets to be, strangely enough and ironically, human, very human.
Yes.
Yeah. And we see a lot of that in this specific episode. And we see a lot of the relationship between him and Loki build in this episode, which is super important for the ending, which we will get to. But first, I want to talk to you about one of the kind of technological advances that the TVA has, and that's the resets that we got a little bit of in episode 1. It was used originally with Loki. They set one off when they arrested Loki and took him back to the TVA as a variant. But we see a lot more of them in this episode. From what I understand, what these resets do, they're kind of like C4 plants, but like on a timer. And then once they go off, they reset these branches of the timeline that grow off of the one timeline that's to be protected. We kind of learn in this episode, Loki refers to kind of talks to about them being, they destroy everything. It's not that they reset it. They kill the universe that exists on that branch. That's how they kind of prune it off. And I think that's important to Loki's character, too, because he knows that's ultimately his destiny if he goes against the TVA. He knows that he is now a part of this branch that needs to be cut off.
I think it's just the affected area. Right?
I don't know if that's true, because in this episode, Loki was
like in the tent. When they set the thing off in the tent, it eviscerated all of like the props and stuff that were inside the area. I don't think it destroyed all of the Ren Fair people as well.
Okay, so not the universe, just the infected things. So, like, if somebody saw a variant, then that person, unfortunately, is also going to be destroyed. I see what you're saying, because another important plot in episode 2 was Loki figures out that there's a good chance that the variant that they're hunting is hiding in apocalyptic events, such as Pompeii. Because he realizes that if the variant were to act in these destructive instances of time, it would camouflage their acts because everything would be destroyed anyway.
Yes.
So I think you're right, because those didn't end the world. They just destroyed the evidence of there being a variant, so everything continued on forward.
Because nothing that the variant would have done in that situation would have prevented what was going to happen.
Okay, so that is probably how the resets work.
So the variant could have run around, like we saw Loki. Loki ran around and was like letting like animals out. He was screaming, telling them stuff or whatever, but that volcano still erupted no matter what. Now, granted, one could argue that he could have corralled everyone in Pompeii somehow if he got there earlier and told them to evacuate the city. Pompeii goes off, the volcano, but no one dies.
Right. But because everything was still destroyed, it's cool. It's clear. It's kosher. So one of the reasons why I wanted to talk...
But I'm wondering though, even though the city gets destroyed with people in it or without people in it, I think there would be a problem if he got a group of them or all of them out of the city,
or even one of them,
or even one. So if in time, in the sacred timeline, everyone in Pompeii was supposed to die. That's just the way it was going to end up. And he goes there and he grabs one. He's like, let's go. And they run out of the city. That, I believe, would be considered a Nexus event. And then things would splinter off. Because that person would have been like, oh shit, what just happened? And then that person would then continue on living knowing that that just happened. And they're a survivor of it. And Loki came in and saved the day and stuff. So that would create not a paradox, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but because... Loki didn't get there in time to warn really anyone of anything. He just got there in time to gloat that it was going to happen, and then when it happened, that was it. Then it didn't cause a Nexus event. So
yeah, and he also wasn't like intent on trying to warn them. He was just kind of trying to be a dick.
Yeah. So, keeping all of that in mind, moving on to the end of episode 2, we find from the pack of gum, which is something that you point out to me from episode 1, there was candy given to a child, and that candy, according to this episode, was only made for 10 years.
Yeah.
So wherever this variant was, it had to have been a apocalyptic event that happened within those 10 years. For them to be hiding out in it and to have also gotten the candy. And using that information, they're able to find the variant in I guess, what is their version of like a Walmart.
Yeah, I think it's in Alabama too, if I'm not mistaken, in
Yeah.
the year 2050.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a Roxxon, which that appears in a plenty of MCU films. That company.
Roxxon, actually, if you remember from I think
It's
it
in
was
Miles
Spider-Man
Morales.
Miles Morales. Roxxon is the company that is like the big bad evil guys.
Yeah. So that's a whole canon thing, and I'm sure there will be more Roxxon stuff in the future of MCU.
It's
but
just
that's
cool to
where we
see,
go.
you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like Pizza Planet in Pixar.
Yeah.
It just keeps popping up. It exists in the universe.
Keep showing up.
They show up to this Walmart Roxxon place because they've narrowed down their search, and they're like, this is where the variant could be hiding. This could be one of the areas because it meets the criteria, the two criterias that we found. Sure enough, the variant's there. There's a bunch of people in a storm shelter that are unfortunately going to die. And we see this really interesting interaction between Loki and the variant as the variant takes over the Timekeeper, B-15, and then moves over to another civilian, then to another civilian. And they're kind of having this back and forth, and you can feel Loki's presence within those characters in small, different quirks and little intricacies.
Right.
And then it gets to the point where it's like, all right, joke's over. Who is this? And camera zooms in, cloak reveals it is a woman.
It is female Loki.
Lady Loki, which
That's
this
right.
is not unheard of. This was in the comics. After the
in
Ragnarok
the comics, it
event.
happens. Yep.
Do you want to say it?
Yeah, it happens in the Ragnarok event. Originally, it was supposed to be, I believe, a body for
Sif. Yep.
Yeah, and instead, Loki, being the trickster that he is, took the body for himself and became Lady Loki.
It's a win for us because it's great storytelling and the show's awesome. And this actress, Sofia Del Martino, looks like she's going to be fantastic in this show as Lady Loki. Now, there is something I want to talk about in regards to
Let's
this.
talk about it.
That is considered potentially a spoiler. I don't know. So put on your spoiler caps. So one of these, Disney Plus, like the credits, if you're I guess watching it with certain subtitles, or if you're watching it in a different region, Sophia DiMartino's character does not appear in the credits as the variant. She appears as Sylvie, Sylvie, Sylvie.
Okay.
And if you look up Sylvie in the Marvel database, Sylvie Lushton is Enchantress.
Okay, so we're thinking that Enchantress is now working with an actual Loki variant to trick Loki.
I'm not sure. This one sentence here: Sylvie Lushton was just an average girl living in Bronxton until the Asgardians moved their home of Asgard to Oklahoma. So she became imbued with powers. So not long after that, Sylvie woke up one day with magical powers. Unbeknownst to Sylvie, these powers were given to her by Loki for yet unknown purposes. With her new powers, Sylvie moved to New York City to become a superhero and join the Avengers. She chose to take on the name and style of Amora the Enchantress, speaking in faux Asgardian manner.
I think this might be a case of MCU rewrite, where like how they took like Spider-Man and Miles Morales and basically made them one character to have a different take on Spider-Man than the last two Spider-Man movies that we saw. I think this is going to be a kind of similar thing where they take Lady Loki and Enchantress, and they're like, Enchantress exists because Enchantress used to be Loki. But there couldn't be two Lokis in one timeline. Maybe. I don't know how it's going to get explained, but it's one of two things. It's either MCU combining two characters to make Lady Loki and Enchantress just one character in their canon, or two, it's Enchantress is working with another Loki variant to kind of throw our Loki off the trail.
Yes. I honestly think it could be either. There's
Yeah.
equal evidence to support that this is just a Marvel rewrite doopity doop, or she is 100% Lady Loki. You know, it's just it. I just found it interesting, and I found it earlier today after watching the episode. So I think there's a lot of
I think
people
that's
that are going to be
very
speculating about
interesting.
this for a while. There's two more things I know I want to talk about. I want to talk about so this episode ends and she drops those pruning things? Is that what she did?
So those are the thing that we had just talked about. Those things that we speculate delete things out of the timeline that throws it into a variant state. So it gets rid of all variant events, people, objects. That's what we're assuming. She throws those down into different spots on the timeline because she's able to open up time doors. And they all drop through these time doors. And we see as the sacred timeline starts sprouting all over the place rapidly. Basically to the point where I don't see them being able to contain this. I think that what we just watched was the moment that the multiverse is created. Because I don't see them pulling this back. It's just too much going on, too much chaos. It doesn't look like it's going to be possible.
Yeah.
But that's where I question the technology, because if how we speculated it only deletes variants and variant activity, it shouldn't have an effect on the timeline if the timeline had no variants in the spots where they were dropped. But it seems like because she dropped them in those areas, it created a variant of its own, which is confusing. I don't really understand that technology.
Yeah, I think the baton thing, the retconner or whatever it's called, that's pretty self-explanatory. They zap someone with it, and then they basically cease to exist.
Yeah.
Perfect. Whatever. It's these little jars, right? It's the things that they plant at the scene of a crime, the scene of a variant crime, that eludes me still as to what exactly it does and what its effect is.
So a lot of these things that we're seeing in this series, they are metaphors for the writing process. So like you said, that stick is like how you said, the retcon, or the ret baton, if you will. They talk about the three wise men, however you want to, whatever they call them, the three men in the sky who make the timeline. In this episode specifically, the Timekeepers, thank you. Owen Wilson says that what the Timekeepers do is they untangle the web of different multiverses, and they write the story that they want to write, because they are the writers of the story. They could easily be replaced with the literal writers of the show. Could be considered these people. But when it comes to like the jar, it makes me think of a reboot. So like how we had the original Spider-Man canon by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and we also had like the Amazing Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man. We have the Spider-Man from the video game verse. These are all reboots of the same character. And if this jar is technically a reboot, like they put it down and it just clears it and they start anew from that moment on, maybe that's what's causing the variance, is the fact that she didn't create havoc in these timelines. Instead, she literally dropped these jars into those places and released them back into the wild from where they were once captured. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I mean, what I can gather is that she dropped these things and in general is creating chaos.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
It's how that she's creating chaos that we don't know.
Yeah, what that chaos entails, like what does that actually look like? How it manifests itself, I don't know yet, and maybe we have yet to see. But I just pulled up this screen grab from the show, and I'll just run down a couple of the locations with which they dropped these things. Because now we see where everything starts to split off. So Vormir in the year 2301, Vormir was the planet where the Soulstone was. from Infinity War and Endgame. There is Asgard in the year 2004. Rome, Italy in 1390. There was, let's see here, Sakaar. That is a Guardians of the Galaxy planet, is it not?
Yeah, I believe it is.
Sakaar.
Is it not the planet?
What are you
Like
talking about?
the Guardians of the Galaxy planet that was like Star-Lord's dad was a planet? Is it that planet?
I think Sakaar is I think that's where that's what it is. Sakaar is the trash planet from Ragnarok, Grandmaster.
Oh.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Okay, so Sakaar, Ego, the planet.
Ego is the
Yep.
one who is Star-Lord's father. Okay, so
Yes.
he did get a little present from Lady Loki.
Yes, and then Titan, that is Thanos' homeworld.
Right.
New York, Tokyo, Japan, Xandar, that's Guardians. Xandar is definitely Guardians.
This is interesting. This is going to lead to a lot of speculation that I think we're going to get a lot of the answers to in the next episode. I think for now, I think we've covered all that we can confidently cover.
I do want to cover one last thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about who could potentially be, teased in this show that is coming later on in the MCU. I want to talk about Kang the Conqueror.
Yes.
Yes.
He has a lot of ties to the story already. A lot of the characters in the story in the MCU comics are tied to Kang.
Like
One of the overseers of the timeline actually worked with him at one point in the comics.
Are
I
you
don't
talking
exactly
about
remember their
the Judge
connection.
Ravonna?
Yes, the Judge
Yes.
Ravonna. That's right. And then the Judge is actually in a romantic relationship with one of them, I believe.
I believe it's Kang, if I'm not mistaken. And
Ah.
another reason why I bring this up is because in the Loki show, when they're talking about the sacred timeline and Miss Minutes is giving her whole ordeal, it shows the Timekeepers, and if I'm not mistaken, at least one of them is blue in the face, like Kang. And if you look at the wood carvings and just the statues of all of the Timekeepers in the show, one of them looks an awful lot like Kang, just roughly in its physique and its facial features. And it's interesting that also Ravonna seems to be the only one that can communicate with the Timekeepers. And it's very kind of hush-hush, closed-lip, like, I'll talk to them or whatever, kind of like, Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Like, let me go talk to the peek behind the curtain kind of thing. So, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that, we're going to see Kang in the show. I don't necessarily think that, any of the stuff that I said is true, but I definitely think that there is a lot of hints being dropped. This show feels like the world in which Kang would operate in. And since we know he's actually coming in the new Ant-Man movie, this is not like a Mephisto thing in WandaVision where we're all like, is it Mephisto? Is it Mephisto? It's like, no, we know Kang is coming. We have no idea if Mephisto is ever going to show up ever in the MCU, but we know Kang will. So it would make sense that they start laying the groundwork. What that ends up looking like by the end of this, I have no idea. I just think that there's some interesting seeds being planted that I would be curious if we see the fruits of that as the show continues.
One of the last things that we see in episode 2, just to kind of wrap this up and lead us into next week's discussion, we see a time door open. We're going to put quotes around Lady Loki goes into the time door doing her wave. That felt a little out of character for Loki, so maybe that's a hint to maybe her not being Lady Loki. Who knows? And our Loki, our variant Loki, after what seemed like a very hard choice, turns away from Owen Wilson's character and runs into the time door, abandoning both the TVA and Owen Wilson's character there to be left dumbfounded and wonder if that Loki maybe had been in on it the whole time. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be an interesting thing, especially after watching their relationship develop over the last 2 episodes and become something that was actually really enjoyable to watch, the two of them interacting with each other. It was a heartbreaking moment to see like all of that it was leading up to kind of be crumpled down to a trust issue that happens as he runs through this door. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It also doesn't seem like a move that's out of Loki's character. Seeing this Lady Loki and this elusive character over the last 2 episodes, I actually seen it happen and seeing what she did and her running away. Loki running in after her is completely in character of him. It just, obviously it sucks, for Owen Wilson, Mobius, to be like, oh shit, I lost him again. And like, what's going to happen now? And when they do eventually reunite, like, what's that conversation going to look like? Will Loki have more information and maybe have Lady Loki with him? Like, we don't know. Another thing I will mention, just because I was looking at the cast list and we don't know yet.
Okay.
An actor, Richard E. Grant, is in this show, and he does not have a character name yet.
Interesting.
So he is an uncharacterized actor that is going to be in this show. So
something big and secret. We know that. Something
big and secret is probably afoot here, and so I guess we'll have to find out in the subsequent episodes.
It's exciting to watch this unfold in front of us. It's a great time to be a Marvel fan. We're getting a lot of great series, and it's awesome that, some people had complained like they were doing weekly releases instead of releasing them all at once, as Netflix often does, but it gives us a chance to sit down and talk about them episode by episode and really look at these minute details. And that's what we want to do in this series. So thanks for tuning in to the inaugural episode of You, Me, and Loki. Thank you, Nick, for coming in. It's a good name, isn't it?
It's funny.
I like
when you
the
sent
name.
it to me, I was like, well, I guess that works.
Yeah, I like it. So until next week, we will see you guys again next Wednesday. Thanks.
Yes.